Hi, welcome to the Middle Ground Book Fest, a festival that focuses on the 8 to 14-year-old reader. I'm Lorien Lawrence. I'm the author of the Fright Watch series, The Stitchers, and The Collectors. And I am so excited to host this panel about one of my favorite things to talk about, witches. So before we kick it off, I'd love for us to go around and introduce ourselves. Karah, I'll start with you.
Yes, hello. I'm Karah Sutton. She, her. I am a Kentucky-born author who currently lives in New Zealand, and I am the author of A Wolf for a Spell, which features the Russian witch Baba Yaga, who is well known in Russian mythology, and I'm very excited to talk about her today.
Hi, I'm Julie Abbott. I am the author of Eva Evergreen, Semi-Magical Witch, and the sequel, Eva Evergreen and the Cursed Witch, which comes, I think, the day that this panel, it goes live. I also write young adult with witches, so lots of witches to be found.
Hi, everybody. My name is Graci Kim. I am the author of The Last Fallen Star, which is inspired by Korean mythology about Korean American tweenage witches living in LA, but they exist all around the world. So that's me and witches. I'm obsessed with witches ever since day dot. I also, like Karah, live in New Zealand. Karah lives in Wellington. I live in Auckland. We used to live in the same city, and unfortunately, we no longer do. So we don't get to see each other in person as much, but yay for New Zealand!
Hi, I'm Ash Van Otterloo. I'm the author of Cattywampus, which is a book about two witches, and also my latest book, which is a ghost book set in the same setting, Howler's Hollow, which is a touch of ruckus, and that's coming out in September.
Yay, I'm so excited to add all of these books to my bookshelves. I want to start us off with, I can hear the excitement in everyone's voice when they say the word witch, and I want to get into that. What is it about witches? They're timeless. What is it that makes them kind of universally appealing? Ash, we'll start with you.
Oh, wow. Let's see. Where to start, right? There's so much to say about witches that I could talk about them for hours. So I think I'll pick maybe my favorite thing about witches. I think my favorite thing is that witches, they kind of function outside of whatever the traditional power structure is. They kind of function outside of it. So they have this way of creatively solving problems in a way that exists out of the traditional avenues of education or power or people who are in authority, which is maybe why they're a little bit scary, but I think also why they're so intriguing and definitely a big part of why I love them.
Gracie, what do you think? What is it about witches that makes us drawn to them in literature?
Sure. So for me personally, I've thought about this a lot, and I think it's because they feel so real. Like I can imagine witches being a part of our everyday society, that maybe my next door neighbor is actually a witch and I just don't know it. It's that idea of the magic being a part of our world, or that it could be. It's that possibility that I think makes the concept of witches so exciting, because magical, fantastical worlds set in complete different worlds are so much fun, but it's that little bit removed. It's like getting rid of that wall and just that hope that real magic possibly is all around us. I think for me, that's what gets me about witches.
I totally agree. It's that kind of what if factor. Julie?
So similar to Gracie and to Ash, what I love about witches is they're a bit of everyday, but also they give magic and they give hope. And so sometimes I'm like, when I was a kid, I was like, I wish I was a witch because then I can do more. Or I wish I was a witch, or a witch would come and swoop down and save me. And so I think that made it feel so real, but also so possible, even though it was so magical. So it was contradictory, but also something I just loved ever since growing up.
Karah, what about you? Have you always loved witches?
Yeah, I think so. It's one of those things I didn't realize it until I was thinking about it as an adult, and then I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, no, this is something that's kind of always been a love that I've had." And I really love that point of how they feel real versus like wizards feel kind of otherworldly, or sorcerers, or any other types of magic users, but witches feel like they could be part of our world. And I think also there's that, there tends to be, not always, but there's often kind of an earthiness or like an elemental aspect to the magic. Especially you hear in different stories like different types of witches, like hedge witches, or maybe they're kind of herbalists, or maybe you'll often see things with like flames. Or I just read a book called The Last Wind Witch, where it was winds and stuff as well. So there's something about that being able to control the elements that gives it this kind of feeling of something that you can touch, which I really love. And I think the other thing for me too is that they can run the gamut from being kind of creepy and scary to being really lovable. And you see, I mean, like Eva Evergreen's a perfect example of where it's like the witches are so like kind of cozy, and there's something just really like warm and comforting about it. But then you can have witches that are like kind of threatening, or like the witch that lives in the woods and you don't know whether she's gonna like eat children in her gingerbread house or whatever. So yeah, I think there's something fun about that unpredictability as well, which I really love.
That's like one of the things that I have always loved about witches, especially in movies and literature, is that they are so different. It's not like a monolith, right? And you, Karah, we're hitting on all of that. We'll get into the elements a little bit later, but I want to kind of talk a little bit about the kinds of witches that are in your books. So, Karah, you mentioned like, some are really earthy and pull the elements in, some are really cute, like Kiki's Delivery Service. My nieces were obsessed with that. And there are witches that make candy. Then there are witches that steal your soul. There are some that are based more on folklore. There are some that are based on real life. What kind of witches are in your stories? Gracie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, okay. So for me, I loved the traditional idea of witches that I got anyway growing up. So, thinking Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, any kind of witchcraft in the mainstream fascinated me. But with my story, what I did was I tried to inject a bit of what was true to me. So my Korean heritage and my the mythology and the folklore and the stories that I was told growing up. So my witches are a mix of both. So, cauldrons exist, and, the term witches exist, except there are 6 clans derived kind of tongue-in-cheek from the fact that there are a handful of Korean surnames that a lot of people share. So this idea that we all belong in these large clans, even though there are sub-communities within them. And the 6 different clans have their own magic. But yeah, it's this idea that our power is derived from our ancestors, ancestral goddesses. So there are 6 ancestral goddesses. And that, again, harks back to this idea of traditional Korean shamanistic ancestor worship, and that the power is derived from our ancestors. So it's a kind of a mishmash fusion of all the things I loved growing up seeing in mainstream witchcraft with all the things that I think are special about Korean mythology and folklore. And to the point that sometimes I get asked in my book, what is like true mythology and what is my own creation, and I have forgotten where some of those boundaries are because they have merged a lot. So I try to err on the side of saying none of it's mine because I don't want to take credit for it all. But yes, a mishmash of Korean and mainstream white Western witch fiction.
I love I love the idea of pulling things that you were fascinated with growing up and then things from your culture and kind of weaving them together. I think you should just claim it all as being yours. But Ash, what about you?
Well, kind of like Gracie, some of the roots for the witch magic system that I wrote are like from my own family roots, which are Scottish and Irish and everybody who eats a lot of potatoes. But also where I grew up was like in the mountains in Appalachia. So sometimes when you're far out in the mountains, like it can be tricky to always have like the resource to fix something. So my relatives were always like finding a way to do it yourself, like constantly, or using like spare parts to like kind of use ingenuity to fix things or rig things. So I was like, I would like to give like an homage, I guess, to that kind of can do fix things with what's on hand moxie. So I have one of my witches is very tied to nature and is able to use nature magic to creatively solve problems. And the other one is more or less like a tinkerer who manipulates like objects. For instance, an outhouse, she's able to kind of like animate the outhouse with her magic and use it as a vehicle to travel around in the mountains because, you know, what 12-year-old has a car? So she's able to kind of call on that can do it yourself, I'll figure this out with what's on hand magic. So I kind of took them and mishmashed them, and kind of similar, I think, to Gracie, like it's hard for me to tell where my magical system begins and where the other one ran into it, which I guess is the goal. Yeah, so I had a lot of fun with that.
I love witches with moxie. That's like my favorite kind of character for sure. Let's go to Karah and then Julie.
Yeah, so it's funny, there seems to be a running theme here between not being quite sure where the influences end and the kind of self-generated ideas begin. So mine, Baba Yaga is an existing well-known character in Slavic myth. I guess it's hard to say whether it's like mythology or folklore. She kind of blends, actually. She's a very, very old, historically character, so they think that she might date back all the way to like Slavic paganism and pre-Christian times in that region, but they're not quite sure. But yeah, she's definitely much more of the traditional terrifying witch of the woods. She lives in a house that has chicken legs, and the house can run around, and she's kind of a traditional character who is said to who parents kind of use as a threat to behave. So if you don't, do your chores, I might leave you in the woods and Baba Yaga will find you, kind of thing. Or Baba Yaga is the more correct pronunciation, but kind of in English, I think most people say Baba Yaga. Yeah, she's traditionally pretty scary, or seen as pretty scary. But what's interesting is that in Russian fairy tales especially, she is actually sometimes helpful. So there are some Russian fairy tales where the prince might be lost in the woods or whatever, and he comes across, the chicken leg house, and he doesn't know whether he's about to be threatened by this terrifying character, or and unexpectedly she will kind of invite him in and will give him something to help him on his journey. So there's a couple stories where she gives, different tokens that end up helping the character on their way. And that was what really made her fascinating for me, was this idea that you just didn't know when you came across her whether she was going to be threatening or not. And so I wanted to explore that idea of, why would she have this reputation for being so terrifying, but then also be somebody who might help you from time to time. And the other thing that was interesting was she's not in the stories anyway. She's not necessarily seen as like this forest magic-y kind of person. She has, in the way I depict her in the book, in A Wolf for a Spell, I have her very clearly like drawing magic from the earth. It comes from the forest. That was definitely something I kind of came up with because I wanted to figure out where her magic comes from and what its limits were. For her in the stories, it's much more, she has these kind of magical helpers. So she has like a pair of severed hands, and she has like horsemen who bring the day and the night and the dawn, and she has a lot of different servants and things who help her, but she is potentially like an earth goddess in some like historic settings. So it was fun kind of looking through all of this history of her as a character and kind of blending things together and going, okay, if she is seen as this kind of earth goddess of the forest because she's existed for a long time and she always lives in the forest, and she has this hut that kind of blends and travels the forest, then how about her magic comes from the forest itself? So yeah, that was really fun, just like combining different things about a character who has a lot of history behind her, and a lot of specifics, but then getting to invent some of those specifics as well.
I love that. I love the idea of her being really unpredictable as well, and the kids not really knowing what version they're going to get. Julie, what about you? What kind of witch do we have?
So for Eva, I went for, I guess I would say, more realistic with a touch of cute, I would say. So actually, I should probably mention Eva is the story about a girl with just a little pinch of magic who's trying to become a witch. And if she doesn't pass her test, she's going to lose her powers forever. So in terms of Eva, like I tied power a lot to her belief in herself, because I feel like that is also a huge kind of magic. And I think in everyday life, we kind of don't think of it that way, but I try to draw that out within this story and compare it to Eva's mom, which is, she's actually on the cover and she's like really small in the tower watching over Eva. But Eva's mom is like super strong, and the definition of like, I can do this, like, oh, she's like the most powerful witch in the realm. And then Eva's literally the least powerful witch in the realm. So that sort of comparison, I think, was something that I think shows up well in magic. But I also felt it had parallels to people and their own hopes and their own dreams. And if they want to go and achieve them, how they may feel. Like for Eva, she was like, I'm not good enough. And that was her kind of magic. Whereas her mom was at that point in her career or her life as a witch where she was like, I'm strong. And so in the way, I felt like magic was the way I could tell the story, and that it may relate to readers, even though it's completely different. It's magic. But I think it speaks across boundaries in a way that I haven't seen from many other things in literature. So that's why I love witches.
I love that you're using them to help you, kind of give a theme, right? Create a theme and weave it in so that readers, especially at this age, comparing yourself to other people, not feeling like you're good enough, like those kinds of themes are so important to kids who read middle grade because they're really going through that. I want to shift a little bit and talk about the fun stuff. I want to talk about spells and rituals. No matter the kind of witch or witchcraft that is being portrayed, usually rituals play some kind of role. And I was just wondering if rituals played any role in your novels. So this time I'll start with Karah.
That was definitely something that I played with a lot. I would say it's less, it came to be less of a thing in the story. I originally had like all these kinds of rules around how magic worked, that it was like you needed an object and an incantation and a something else. I can't even remember actually anymore. The key thing, I ended up deleting a lot of that over the course of writing, but the key thing was that you still needed an object of the forest that you were that you had close by you in order to perform the magic. But yeah, I actually Don't have a lot of rituals remaining. So it was one of those things that I started with, and then I have a tendency to overcomplicate things. So yeah, I had actually started with this very complicated ritual, and then I kind of removed it all so that it was, you just needed something, you know, whether it was a leaf or a rock or something nearby in order to perform magic. Yeah.
I can relate to that. I do that all the time. I have like folders full of things that I thought I needed really desperately and then didn't. Julie, what about you? Are there any rituals in Eva?
So for me, I tried to play with a lot of common sort of expectations of what a witch should be. Some of the way that Eva is trying to live up to those expectations. So for her, like, spells were most powerful in the form of rhymes. But on the other hand, her mother, who's super strong, could just do a one-word spell. So I like to use that as a contradiction, or like the cauldron, like, you know, the whole typical cauldron. Like Eva, because she's not quite all strong, she has like a frying pan. So she uses her frying pan to create her potions. So little things like that, like I took and like played with it and made it Eva's to make it really work for her.
I love that. I love how individualist that is for little Eva. Gracie, what about you?
Sorry. For me, I kind of took, I mean, I love the idea of rituals. So I'll talk about two different ways in this world how rituals fit in. And they're more like ceremonies or coming of age times of a witch's life. So for example, when a gifted witch is 100 days old, they have a ceremony in which their lacking element is revealed. So what that means is, because every witch is born with 4 sacred elements, but a witch requires a perfect balance of all 5 sacred elements in order to channel the divine magic of their patron goddess and therefore do the magic of their clan. So the ceremony at 100 days old reveals the 4 that they're born with, which then tells them the 5th one, which they lack. The 5th one is the one that ends up becoming a charm that they wear on the wrist, which helps them channel and do their magic. So that's the first ritual that all gifted kids at 100 days old will do. And this is kind of drawn from the Korean Puljabi ceremony. When we turn 100 days old, we have a ceremony to celebrate, honestly, historically, to be still alive, because a long time ago, they didn't really regard a child to be of this world yet until they passed at least 100 days. And in the real ceremony, in the Puljabi ceremony, kids are put in front of a small table of items that have symbolic meaning, and whichever they choose is supposed to define the type of life they're supposed to have. So string means long life, or a calligraphy brush means creativity. My daughter recently had hers, and she grabbed a calligraphy brush. So perhaps she'll be a writer one day, who knows? So anyway, that's the 100-day ceremony, the key ceremony, because the charm is called the key. And then when they turn 13 is their initiation ceremony, in which they have to use their key, which they've been training with parental supervision since the 100-day ceremony, to do 3 spells in front of a congregation of witch clans, and show that they have what it takes to become a true initiated witch. And if they pass this test, it means they can wear the key bracelet without parental supervision and therefore be able to do magic at their will. So those are the kind of 2 key rituals in a witch's life that are crucial in this world. And one final thing I'll mention, just because I love this, old Korean belief is that spirits and magic live all around us in our homes. So like the home being the hearth, being the heart, is where so much of the magic is held. So for example, there's like a god of old pots, and things like that, and the god of the doorway. So I kind of played on that. All gifted witches in this world, their gifted homes are magical because they have seen and witnessed so much magic by just sheer existence of being shelter to witches, that they have themselves become enchanted. And so when witches cross the boundary into and out of homes, they must give the house a compliment, or the door spirit a compliment. So there's like the door spirit, there's the kitchen spirit, there's even a toilet spirit, who you must show your respects every time you use their services. So, yeah.
I love that, the toilet spirit. You have to show them the respect. But I love that you're, again, you mentioned this before, but that blending of Korean culture with what you're taking and kind of giving it a fresh twist and making it really relevant to kids today. I love that. Ash?
I'm having to like switch gears from being completely fascinated from listening to talking about my book. It's so hard. So I guess in Cattywampus, there's an old grimoire, which is like a spell book that is kind of a character of its own. It might as well be a character in the story because it gets carried everywhere and almost lost and dropped in the dirt. And so anyway, it's a collection of spells that basically the McGill family, which is the main character, Delpha, has like all the matriarchs of their family have written their own created spells into the grimoire. So Delpha herself has been forbidden from practicing magic because her mother lost someone due to magic when she was young. So she sees magic as a liability and has basically cut herself off from this tradition. So Delpha has found this grimoire. And so you have a 12-year-old girl whose father has left several years before and whose mother is cut off from magic, and she recently lost her magical grandmother, staring down this grimoire that's full of these powerful words written by very accomplished women who have had years and experience and, lived mistakes to be able to get to the point where they can identify their own magic and then write it creatively. And I thought that was such an important ritual to acknowledge within the book, because I think lots of people, like Julie was saying, have the experience of looking at someone who is deeply accomplished and admiring them and wanting that for yourself and not really knowing how to get there, right? Because 11 or 12 is often an age of trying to figure yourself out and trying to figure out, what is it that makes me special? What am I actually good at, right? So at the very beginning of the book, Delpha discovers that all of her ancestors have used wands to focus their magic. And it just so happens that the only thing her father has left her is a carving knife when he left. So she carries around always, and throughout the course of the book, I think she breaks her wand like 4 or 5 times because they're riding around in a magical outhouse. Things are going to happen. So throughout the book, over and over and over, she's carving these wands. They're going from like kind of crude wands to like more ornate, detailed, personalized, this is my wand wands, as her magic evolves throughout the story. So she gets to identify, what is it that makes me strong as a person, as her wand evolves too. So I thought that was kind of fun, and a good concrete metaphor for, how we experience discovering our own personal power and identity. Yeah.
I mean, you had me at magical outhouse. Also, you had me at wand. Also, you had me at the fact that she's klutzy and has broken a lot of wands. Because if I were a witch, I would be that clumsy witch. And you really had me at grimoire. I was obsessed with that idea when I was a kid. And I remember I got a little notebook and I tried to write my own grimoire because I was like, oh, the future generations of Lorien are going to need this. And I would write my little spells. And yeah, I would have made a terrible witch. But speaking of spells, are there any spells that you wish you could cast? It could be based on your book. It could just be something from your personal life. But if you could cast a spell, what would you cast? I'm going to start with Julie this time.
Okay, so I have a few deadlines right now. So what I would love is a spell that could cook and could clean for me, because that would be like, you don't want to see the rest, but that would be amazing.
I would love that too, especially the cleaning part. Karah, what about you?
I feel like that's a really good one, because that is probably what I would do. This is gonna sound kind of, ooh, what just happened? Did I die? It's showing. There we go. Okay, it was showing me as loading for a second. Yeah, I feel like something that I would probably use a lot is maybe something that kind of brings calm and like banishes worries. I think that would be a thing I would use on a daily basis. So I think I'm sure there are much more like philanthropic spells that I would also love to use. There are a lot of things I would love to fix in the world, but if I'm thinking of like casual daily spells, that would probably be one for me.
Well, that sounds like a lovely one. That's very selfless. I'm thinking I would like a gardening spell. Ash, what about you?
Oh my gosh. I think any spell that would allow me to not have to sleep as much. If I could just have like a potion and I could just take it, like I love being awake. I love doing things. I always have since I was a kid. I think once when I was like 4 years old, my dad was like, sure, you can stay up as long as you want, because he thought I was just going to like cack out at 10 o'clock. And I think he came into my room at 2 a.m. and I was like doing an elaborate pretend or something with my stuffed animals. And he was like, go to bed now. And I was like, you said I could stay up as long as I wanted to. And now, I mean, of course, I have a lot more responsibility and I'm a parent. So, like, if I could just stay up and be able to do all the many projects that I start and don't quite finish that are piling up around me, that would be just perfect. Yeah.
I feel this so much. I feel all these spells so much.
Same. I love those. Gracie, what about you?
So mine is from the book. The main character comes from the clan of Korm, and Korm are the healers. And honestly, I think that if I could cast any spell on the day today, it would be the ability to heal. I hate that feeling of helplessness when I see my loved ones be in pain. So I think if I could do anything, if I could have that power to heal, I would love to do that. But also cheating, I know you said one, but another one I would love is I have a clan of Toki. They are infusers who make potions, but they also run a lot of the best restaurants around town because they can enchant substances with magic, therefore make food magical. And I'd love that because I just love food, and the idea of food being enchanted just like literally makes me want to do a dance. So magical food as well.
I can't argue with that. I mean, I would be all about that one. Magical food. I like all your answers. Those are all things that I could absolutely use in my day to day. I think we have time for one or two more questions. So I want to circle back to elements. I know, Karah, you brought it up a little bit earlier. 4 elements tend to be important in most stories about witches. You know, we have earth, fire, air, and water. I'm curious, which one of those 4 elements do you as an author, like you as a human, most identify with, and why? Ash, you're laughing, so I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I am laughing about this one. I think that like, if you look at my astrology signs, it's like fire, 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 all across the board. But interestingly, the thing that I feel the most drawn toward always, and maybe this is like Gracie's system of I don't have enough of it, so I'm like drawn to it, always trying to like balance out my elements, is earth. I love spending time digging in the dirt and gardening and bugs and archaeology and anything that has to do with just like getting down into the earth. I love it so much. Like back when we were dating, my partner used to call me volcanic ash. and I always thought that was kind of appropriate because it's like the place where earth meets fire. That's about right. That's about right. Yeah.
I love that. That's such a great answer. And I like the nickname Volcanic Ash. Gracie, what about you? Which sign do you most identify with?
So interestingly, very similar to Ash. The Korean system of, I guess it's the Korean astrology system, we call it Saju Palja. So everybody is born with 4 elements and 4 animals. So you know how you say you're born in the year of the whatever? So I'm born in the year of the tiger, for example. And then so that's the year, but you also actually have an animal for the month that you're born, the day, and the hour. that you're born, and each of those animals has an element, and it's just based on astrology. There are I think it's called 4-pillar calculator. If you look in Google, it will come up. And so if you do mine, ignoring the animals, the elements, I get basically fire, 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 and fire. Or maybe I have fire, 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 and water, actually, I think, but predominantly fire, which actually injects a lot into my story as well. But I think I would have to choose fire. I just love this idea of fire being transformational. And I'm scared of it, but there's something so beautiful about something you're scared of and being able to learn from it and overcome it and use it in a way that does good. So I would say fire.
All right, so we have a fire, we have an earth. Julie, what about you?
So I actually had to Google what kind of element are you. So I'm looking at the chart right now, and I think I'm a mix between earth and water, because I consider myself very loyal, because the ones that I want to stand behind, I will push and stand behind and like be by their side and like fight for them no matter what. And I also have a bit of, I would say, a little bit of water, because I can be like sort of sensitive. Like, say if someone that I want to be loyal to is saying like says something offhand, and for some reason my feelings get hurt, I'm like, oh no, they don't love me anymore. But I'm also a very private person, which according to Google, water is. So Google helped me with this answer, but
thank you, Google. I'm with you. I'm a water sign, and I would definitely lean towards water. Sensitive person here. Karah, last and not least, what element do you most identify with?
I feel like I should say wind just to round out the group. Yeah, which is funny because actually, if we're talking about like astrology, I'm an Aquarius, which actually is an air sign. So there you go. Yeah, I have a really hard time deciding on this one, to be honest. I feel like I am probably the most like maybe like wind or fire, because I feel like I can be a bit with fire. I feel like I can be a bit impetuous, or I don't want to say destructive, but like kind of, I guess, like fiery. I have a bit of a gosh, my words are failing me right now. I can be kind of strong-willed, I guess, and I feel like that seems like a fire kind of thing. But at the same time, wind, I really admire, because I admire like that feeling of like flexibility, or kind of moving, that kind of grace, and how it's very powerful, but in kind of non-obvious ways, versus like fire and water, which are like, it's really clear how they affect their environments and things. The other thing that came to mind was water, also just because I think Ash mentioned or Graci being a little bit afraid of fire. I actually feel the same about water. Like, water actually makes me really nervous. I tried being like a swimmer for my health and stuff, and lane swimming, and it's like, it actually made me like terrified. I got super nervous, and I was like constantly believing that I was going to drown. So like, water makes me quite nervous, even though I love it. I love looking at the ocean. I live in a seaside town. Like, I can see the ocean from my house, and like, I love looking at water and looking at the ocean, but it like really scares me. So I guess it's like,
Karah.
so I guess
Don't go
it's
in
like,
the water if it scares you. Don't do that to yourself.
But like, if I'm like swimming by the shore, I love it. Obsessed. Anyway,
As long as you're really close to the sand.
So if I'm, yeah, so maybe if I'm picking the thing that I feel like kind of adds to me, then maybe water would be the one I'd choose.
Hold up your hand if the element that you said matches what you would say for your character. Like if you said you were fire personally, is your main character of your book a fire sign as well?
I
Probably.
think so.
Interesting. All right. Well, we have time for one quick question, and I would love to know what a favorite recent witchy read that you have read that you would like to recommend. You don't have to have it with you or hold it up. If you can just say the name so that our lovely viewers watching can go check out some extra witchy reads. So I'll start with Gracie.
Yes, I would love to mention Labyrinth Lost by Zoraida Cordova. And I mention it specifically, even though it's not from the last few years, it's the story that inspired mine. Because the first time that I read a story about witches that wasn't mainstream white Western witches, stories about Latinx witches, and it blew my mind. And it started me off on this creative journey to explore what Korean witches might look like. So I'd like to shout out Labyrinth Lost.
Ash.
Yes. So one that I read this past year that I really, really loved was Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. It's fantastic. The world building is beautiful. The culture is just phenomenal. It crosses like several different cultures, and I really loved it. One other that's coming out this July is The River Has Teeth by Erica Waters. Absolutely phenomenal. Recommend both of them highly.
Kara, then Julie, really quick, what are your witchy read recs?
Yeah, so the one I mentioned earlier, which is called The Last Wind Witch, and I'm sorry, the author's name actually escapes me at the moment, but I just finished it, and it is beautiful, really complex world building, really loved it. And then one that I'm looking forward to is Witches Steeped in Gold by Shannon Smart, which, yeah, can't wait to read. Yeah.
And Julie.
Super speed round. So The Gilded Girl, A Little Princess with Magic. The Witch, The Sword of the Cursed Knights. I'm currently in the middle of reading this right now. And it is so far adorable and has lots of food. So, I mean, and then Last Fallen Star.
Check out their links below with all with access to buy their books. So if they were talking about anything, viewers at home, that you would like to read, you can click and purchase it through RJ Julia Independent Bookstore. Thanks. This was fun. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.